Hello and welcome to this edition of Bayou Time. I'm your host, Keith Whiteside, licensed clinical social worker. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it, no matter how you're joining us. We're glad to have it. And we always like to turn to our local leaders, give us some information and ideas about what is happening. And we turn our attention now. Bryan Fontenot joins us, Louisiana State Representative, District 55. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's always great to have an opportunity to speak with you and the viewers and let them know what's going on in the southern part of the state.
Yeah, we appreciate that. And listen, the southern part of the state certainly has had to deal with a whole lot. We roll out of the second year of COVID right into Ida. And so give us a little bit of an update on how people are doing in District 55 and how you're doing.
Yeah, so, geographically, we stretch kind of far from the northern part of Lafourche down all the way into the Gaines community. So I see a different segments of recovery.
Yeah.
In northern Lafourche, mainly in the city of Thibodaux, we probably have about 80% of those businesses that have come back and have reopened, but there are a large swath of those businesses that have not.
Right.
Rienzi Shopping Center in Thibodaux is completely closed.
Yep.
It probably had 20 businesses in there. Both Wendy's restaurants remain closed, and then there's some small shopping center complexes near the Walmart that included restaurants that remain closed. So from that standpoint, we're running about 80–85% of our businesses have returned. As it comes to debris, I think we've done a great job.
Excellent.
Parish President Chasson has worked really hard in order to get this parish cleaned up in the north, and especially the Mayor SJ in Thibodaux. They were cleaned up fairly quick. Mm-hmm. There still remains some right-of-way issues I noticed just this week down Highway 307 where the state needs to come back and make a second pass on tree debris.
Right.
And then we're having some issues with what is commercial debris that's come out. So the state is responsible on state right-of-ways to pick up that debris that happened immediately after the passage of the storm. And for about 5 weeks, we picked that debris up. Mm-hmm. What some people get confused about is once that has passed and you go in and you do a demolition project and you tear down your apartments or your business and you stack that at the road, it's no longer the state's responsibility to pay that fee. It's commercial debris that needs to be paid for by the landowner.
Right.
So that's where we are on debris pickup, mainly on state right-of-ways and highways. So look, I think things in all have gone fairly well.
Right.
And that's really indicative of the parish president and the mayor. Having a plan available, having contracts in place, and working with those contractors to move us along at the most expedient time. Mm-hmm. We could always dissect things that went wrong, things that look wrong, and things that need to be repaired. And that will happen in every emergency.
Right.
And that will, I'm sure at some point we'll talk about how do we fix those items, and we get back into legislative session at the beginning of next year, and we start addressing some of the shortfalls that we've seen in both response in government and both response in public service providers.
Right. Now, a little closer, a little farther south of your district, Gaines, they got hit pretty hard as the eye of the storm came a whole lot closer to them.
Yeah, certainly. So, the Gaines community and it really in particularly in Raceland and in Matthews that I represent, they got hit significantly harder. Mm-hmm. People would say, Thibodaux wasn't hit that bad. And I'd say, hey, well, when you get south of, the Lafourche Crossing, you're not in Kansas no more. So the destruction there is really twice as bad as what we saw in northern Lafourche, but it's also, in so many instances, the lower income part of Lafourche Parish.
Right.
So the struggles begin there with those people weren't insured.
Right.
They have no way to recover. They have to rely on SBA loans and FEMA payments to be able to rebuild their property. And I think what you'll see in this recovery process is you got to go back and look what history tells us. And when you look just 2 years ago at Lake Charles, and you look at their numbers, you got to believe that will affect us. And that is everything from a decline in student population, which affects the way we pay for the schooling in Lafourche Parish,
right,
to the reduction in property taxes, for which we do not know what it is yet in Lafourche. We will find out within the next 60 days. And we have to look at what blighted properties will increase. Just in the city of Lake Charles, they had over an 800% increase in blighted properties. Those properties that were significantly damaged, the landowner was either renting or did not have insurance and now leaves the property to the government to handle. So I would say in the next 18 to 24 months, you'll have to see Lafourche Parish government having to foot the bill to take away and demo blighted properties.
Right, and that's kind of what we're seeing with debris pickup is a lot of those properties are now starting to be demoed. And so we're seeing that and the impact of that. I kind of want to start this discussion because it's a rather long discussion about what's really happening with this redistricting. So we just have a minute and a half or so in this segment, but I kind of want to start the process so people understand what the redistricting is and what it means.
Yeah, so look, even as a freshman legislator, redistricting for a lot of people, including those veterans and leaders such as Representative McGee and Zerang here in Terrebonne, this is the first time they have a redistricting process. It's something that's only done every 10 years. Should have been done last year,
right.
But because the census numbers were not available, we're going to go back into a special section in the first week of February. Between February 7th and the 20th, we'll be back. And the responsibilities on the legislative body, one is to redistrict or fix the districts for House members like myself, Senate districts, Supreme Court justices, Bessie, and the United States Congress. So look, it's going to be the largest fight in the last 7 to 8 years in Louisiana to figure out where these lines should fall. We hear a lot about gerrymandering and minority districts and what needs to represent Baton Rouge or New Orleans or home of Terrebonne. And Lafourche and Terrebonne have seen significant changes in redistricting. 12, 14 years ago, we had a Bayou Region congressional district. You had guys like the Jeff Landrys and the Charlie Melançons representing us in Washington, D.C. And 10 years ago, we split that district. We came with Congressman Scalise and Congressman Graves. So it's going to be a lot of tests of will and go in and challenge to legislators to get this correct. It's so crucial when we go through this process. And basically, redistricting allocates the amount of people that each individual serves and represents. So particularly in the House of Representatives, each legislator should represent around 44,300 people. But
just on average, right?
That's an average, right? It's a plus or minus, I think, between 10%.
Okay.
And it's broken all the way down into precincts. So sometimes you'll see a precinct on this street and the legislator will represent a different street. And we have to take those numbers by precinct to get us as close as we can to 44,300. But this is the first thing I noticed when we look at this is over the last 20 or 30 years, there is a trend of decreasing populations in the lower parts of Lafourche and Terrebonne Parish. And we could attribute that to a whole lot of issues, right?
Right.
One is we have a disappearing coastline, and we have places that we can no longer develop. Land is not available. What we thought was land, 100 years ago is now coastal wetlands, water areas. So the ability to expand our community is diminishing. And the job industry is diminishing. And when we look at the oil and gas industry and the jobs that are available, they're no longer here, especially in Lower Lafourche, right? We still are the blue collar. We still are the energy port of America. But those high-paying, educated engineering jobs have left. And it clearly shows. Across America, we see an average growth in every state at about 7.5%. In Louisiana, we only at 2.5%. But when we look at our neighboring states in Texas, they're over 15.8% growth. So our people here are clearly moving into states where they have the high-paying jobs. They don't live in an area that can be extremely affected by hurricanes, natural disasters.
Floods.
But in floods, look, I think what you see in the floods is we're going to find out real soon we're not going to be able to afford flood insurance. What FEMA has recently done with, the 2.0, Flood Risk Management 2.0, is going to cost astronomical amounts of money to insure our homes. So all of that impacts the redistricting process because it's driven behind population. So in Lafourche, we gained a small percentage of population, but in Terrebonne, you lost a small percentage of population. Just in the House of Representatives, we have 5 people that represent Lafourche and Terrebonne, of which only 2, myself and Representative Zerang, have gained population. Representative Ogeron in South Lafourche and Representative McGee in South Terrebonne have lost significant population. That means geographically their districts must get larger. It becomes a longer process to drive an hour to go speak with a constituent.
Right.
But everyone is afforded that same opportunity of 44,300 for one representative. And we blessed to have Z and Tanner, right? They are the number 2 and 3 leaders in this capital, and they represent us on the coast. But it is a process that will be endured, and I think it's going to be a tough process. One of the bigger challenges that we face is redistricting our congressional seats.
Okay.
So right now in the state of Louisiana, we have 6 congressmen that work in the United States House of Representatives.
Right.
We have enough population that can sustain those 6.
Right now.
Right now. You most recently saw Governor Edwards make a comment that we should have 2 of those districts should be carved out to represent minority communities. As of today, there is 1. Congressman Carter represents New Orleans and some of that Baton Rouge market up the Mississippi River corridor. So, and look, this is a fair, non-biased redistricting process that's driven by data, and it's driven by what the people responded in their census.
In the census, right.
So there's 2 parts to what the governor says, and like I think it has to be concerning. When he delves into a process before we even begin, and he makes a comment that he thinks there should be 2 minorities, he should first recognize that the seat that lost the most amount of population is Congressman Julia Letlow. She is the first female to ever serve the state of Louisiana in the U.S. Congress, and she is a minority in that Congress. With over 450 members, there are only 21% females. 120 females serve in the U.S. Congress. So I certainly would hate to see her lose a seat as a female if we had to readjust or reproportionate for a minority district. So I think it's a big fight. You got to understand also that both chambers in the State House is controlled by Republicans, right. And not just controlled, it's nearly a 2/3 majority
right.
in both chambers. So it's a steep hill to climb. It's a short period to climb it, and because we were so far behind in COVID numbers and getting the census back, we have a short time frame to accomplish a big task.
Yeah, because you would normally have a whole additional year to be able to do that, because the numbers should have come in last year, but we couldn't. We had to wait and get the numbers this year.
Yeah, no. So the numbers just come in.
Right.
We're looking at these numbers and we're making these moves. And again, we just solicited legislators to sign the call for a special session beginning in February, and it ends on February 20th. Then there is a process that takes place that once the legislative body approves a bill for redistricting, it must go to the governor for his signature.
Right.
The question becomes, if the governor vetoes a redistricting bill, and the legislator doesn't have the votes to override his veto, it would be the first time in Louisiana's history that the Supreme Court will be charged with conducting the redistricting process.
And so it's awfully complicated, but you've really simplified it in as much as how it's going to impact our local leaders and impact some of the people. A lot of this redistricting is going to take some work and some talk, but these new laws that get proposed, those are really important, in as much as that's how we make changes and we make improvements.
No, certainly. And every time we come through a natural disaster, I previously mentioned, we talked about the highs and lows and what we see. And there'll be a mass amount of legislation that you will see proposed in March in the fiscal session of March.
The fiscal session, right.
The regular session in March. But some of those pieces that I have drafted and proposed, some are simple and some are a little more complicated. But, the way of the world today is, and we rely so much on our phones, not for necessarily, surfing for social media, but to get information in times of emergency is delivered in our palm of our hands.
That's
we
right. Rely
on, can you drink the water? Do you must evacuate? When can you come home? What's about power? So I start with, in Louisiana, the telecommunications sector, wireless communication, is not governed by the Public Service Commission. It's one of those services that's governed by the FCC and not the PSC. But I believe there should be some legislation that mandates, if you want to have telecommunications in South Louisiana, you must have generator, propane, natural gas provided, generator backups on every cellular tower. Because it is the way that we communicate with society. And as a public servant, I can't deliver a message to you if you have no ability to read it. Right. So that's one of the pieces of legislation that I intend to bring to try to help us in times of emergencies. Some other things we need to talk about is we had some crimes committed. We had crimes committed in times of emergencies, and criminals are opportunists. And when they see an opportunity that the government mandates you to evacuate, you simply could become a victim. So we have crimes right now in the state of Louisiana. If you commit a crime within a school zone, they have an enhanced penalty. So I'm looking at some legislation that would bring an enhanced penalty. If you commit a crime, if you loot, you steal, you burglarize someone's property because they've been forced to evacuate, well, then the penalty should be doubled. If you're such a low-life criminal that you attack us in our most vulnerable times, then you should serve the most highest penalty.
I absolutely agree. I had stuff stolen from my home.
Oh, goodness.
I had stuff stolen, and look, it's an 8-foot ladder, but guess what? An 8-foot ladder is very expensive. you know?
Yeah, look, sometimes it's about principle. And again,
Yeah.
it's the most vulnerable time that you have is when you're not available to protect your own property, and that criminals, they prey upon that time.
Right.
So we should ensure that we give the power to the district attorneys and to the judges to levy the maximum sentence possible when they affect victims that way.
And enforce that.
Yep. Look, one of the issues that we faced, and we still face today here, especially in Lower Lafourche and Terrebonne, is the ability for someone who lost their home to get housing. Okay? We can clearly say that there are a lot of failures in government, probably starting with the insurance division in the state of Louisiana and going into housing by the federal government. The state of Louisiana has roughly $1 billion, and after this next session will be over $1 billion in state surplus money. We should pass legislation that allows the governor in times of emergencies to access that money to purchase housing. In the end, Representative McGee and Zerang were crucial and instrumental in getting what we have now.
Right.
It's the first time
state to
right.
be able to get housing.
That's correct.
Rather than FEMA. Go ahead.
So
Go ahead.
it's the first time in American history this program has ever been rolled out.
Right.
But we should ensure that we don't have to wait 5 weeks for the federal government. We have an obligation as a state to provide to our citizens. And if money is available in a state surplus fund for which we believe the federal government will someday reimburse us, we should take those dollars and go buy housing for the people that need it immediately.
Right. Because the FEMA plan with providing hotels is not accessible. It wasn't accessible for us. Hotels weren't available.
I was on a phone
people
call
weren't leaving.
with President Gardy Dove and Chasson and all the leaders here in Terrebonne. And they were talking about sending people from Golden Meadow to the Sheraton Hotel on Poydras Street in New Orleans. That's not effective.
No.
That is bureaucratic government making decisions from Washington, D.C. on what we need on the ground in Golden Meadow and in Dularge.
Saying, oh, it's only 60 miles away. It's
Yo,
only
that's
70 miles away.
Yeah,
Well, guess what? That's an eternity
Yeah.
for somebody who may have lost most of what they needed in Golden Meadow.
So we certainly need to look at that aspect and be able to get in place something that can help people immediately.
Right.
And outside of Ida recovery, we have this battle going on now with the governor wanting to mandate vaccines on children.
Right.
And what he doesn't tell you is that the law is very straightforward. And it says that a parent can opt out of that vaccine by signing some paperwork. So I have a piece of legislation that will mandate the school system to notify every parent of a student that they have the right to opt out. I am disgusted that vaccines have become such a political debate. It has been driven by Republicans and Democrats on both sides of the aisle.
Right.
And it doesn't matter to me what the status of your vaccination is. What it matters to me is that as an American, you have the right to decide. I am personally vaccinated. So often I have to give my opinion on TV or on the radio. I am vaccinated, okay?
By your personal choice.
Absolutely. And there will never be a time that Bryan Fontenot will ever vote or support the governor in an initiative when he mandates you to be vaccinated. That should never happen. That is clearly a violation of our constitutional freedoms as humans. But to ensure that for our children, that each parent understands they have the right to opt out, I will pass legislation that mandates the school system to notify every parent of their rights.
Wow, some really, really interesting laws. We're going to look forward to hearing more from you about how that process goes and if, in fact, the legislation agrees and gets that passed. So,
Absolutely.
Brian, we appreciate your time today. We really do. Thank you for joining us.
Certainly, I always enjoy being on. It's always good conversation, good topics, and deliver a message to our people is important.
Well, we appreciate it. All right, guys, that'll do it for this edition of Bayou Time. Don't go anywhere. A whole lot more local programming when we continue.